Hi everyone, and thanks a lot for joining my session. It's a great pleasure to be part of this summit as one of the speaker. Uh, I will be talking about OT ICS cybersecurity assessment, common failure, reason, and impact. My name is Abdurrahman Al Saf, and most of my career during the last 16 years uh, is mainly focused on OT, ISIS, industrial control system, and energy automation system as a system integrator and as an application engineer. Then I moved to cybersecurity, and that was by end of 2011. So starting with a quick awareness note, security assessment scope is not an Excel file you walk through with your stakeholder to make everyone happy and compliant. Looking at assessment, we are doing it just to be compliant to X standard or regulation is not enough. The main objective should become how we secure our organization, how we reduce the risk and the impact the attacker uh, could cause. Now, a quick view on OT security assessment and the source of the assessment. So we have the cybersecurity as an example, the cybersecurity gap assessment and cybersecurity risk assessment, and vulnerability assessment, which is very more specific, and cybersecurity auditing. I'm mainly focusing on the first two here. And when we think about the assessor source, we have external third-party company who provide consultancy services, and we also have internal assessors within the end users and within the ICS vendor. Security assessment success and failure major component. For any cybersecurity assessment to succeed or fail, I have listed down 5 major components. In my opinion and based on my experience, they play a major role in any OT ICS cybersecurity assessment, and that include OT security expertise. And when I say OT, I mean ICS, and stakeholders, number 2, and number 3, coverage and complexity, number 4, assessment timeline, and number 5, finally, realistic action. Now, important note here, all these major components are working together as one symphony, and misalignment in one of them will lead to assessment failure. Starting with assessment timeline, point number 4, as a really critical component. Why assessment timeline tend to be a major cause behind the assessment failure. We will cover that in the other component also in more details. Who decide how long the assessment scope should take? This is a major question here, and usually the one who answers this question is the top management of the organization, the decision maker. And from what I have seen, it really doesn't help the assessment a lot, because when you plan a timeline for any cybersecurity assessment, you need to be aware with the stakeholder you will be meeting or doing the interview with. You need to understand the complexity of the assets and the system you have, and what is the coverage of that system. You need to consider the regulation and standard you are going to assess. It also depends on the level of expertise the assessor have to do the assessment, and how much he is relying on external source to support him, and we will cover that later. So most of the decisions are coming from top management, and they are not paying attention to this detail. In some cases, the assessment scope could be a small part of a project, so it doesn't get the enough time it needs. And another reason, because the purpose is to become compliance, and we focus only on the standard requirement without going to the details that even might be missing in the standard requirement or regulation. And I can imagine the assessors in a situation where they ask themselves, do I have enough time granted to finish the assessment properly? In this slide, I have company X, which could be a power transmission or distribution, power grid, oil and gas, petrochemical, steel factory, for example, or pharmaceutical company. And I have three major components. Without looking at them, the assessment become failure, the planning of the timeline become failure, and that include the number of sites, product line, the time span between projects, and what I mean by projects, by constructing these sites, product line, and the asset and process complexity level. Now, when I take the first one, it's obvious that the less number of sites I have or products line or processes, the assessment will become much easier, and the more sites I have, things will become more difficult. We can take a real example for that in power distribution plant or transmission plant. In some situation, we end up with 1,000 plant distributed in different geographical location or in single geographical location, and that really make it difficult when we do the assessment. And you need to decide how many sites I need to cover and which one I really need to cover. And that take me to the next point, where I have the time span between these projects, the time when these sites were constructed, the time when these distribution plants were energized, for example. Because if I have a group of distribution plant, power distribution plant, that were started 5 years ago, and I have a group that were started 10 years ago or 30 years ago, talking about mechanical relay here, the assessment will take a different direction a bit. And then it take me to the asset and process complexity level. And unfortunately, this is usually not looking at too. And that causes a lot of problem when it comes to assessment. Imagine if I have multiple sites and the time span between these sites are different, you can imagine the differences between the technology, between the systems being used from site to one another. So that take me to the assessors, and we can see where the assessors are sitting here, and they are really stuck between the time assigned for the assessment and between the scope of work they need to deliver. And usually when we look at assessors activity, they are struggle with people. We are talking about stakeholders here. For example, they are struggling with technology. You can imagine the variety in technology and industrial control system, and they are struggling also with process. Imagine when you are dealing with pharmaceutical processes, when you are dealing with energy, different processes, petrochemical plant, oil and gas, etc. So it's really a challenging task. And as a major part of the assessment, assessor responsibility is conducting interviews, with the stakeholders, for example, understanding the international and local standard and regulation. And if you are working in different countries on this part, it's really challenging and time consuming. Reviewing and commenting documents and procedure, collecting and reporting findings and risk, identifying gap and suggesting risk mitigation solution and control, preparing and reviewing deliverable, quality assurance is really important here, and time consuming, and delivering roadmap, accurate CAPEX and OPEX calculation, and conducting awareness and training session by the end of the assessment, etc. So this is some of the major activity the assessors need to get done. Now, moving to OT and ICS security expertise. Now, let's assume I have a consultancy company, a third party who is providing the consultancy services, and the consultancy services is provided to the end user X, here company X, and as I mentioned, it could be a petrochemical, oil and gas. We also have the vendors or the contractor or the subcontractor who is providing the services to this end user, and I look at them as one. That's why I provided the same color here. Now, under the main contractor, we have the cybersecurity team, maybe supply chain and procurement, very important and critical, IT department, OT department, safety and risk. And within the vendor, as I said, it might be a contractor or a subcontractor, IT department, vendors, and supplier. Now, where comes the assessor part here? He plays a major role between all of them, or with all of them. And where we have the industrial control system and process here, and the reason why I keep it here, because at some point the assessor need to connect also with the vendor directly to get the right information, because we know for sure not necessarily the maintenance or operator in the field here knows everything. So there are a lot of information might be missing here, and the only one can give us the correct information is the vendors, the provider of the system. So we also have the documentation review and deliverable here. So we have someone here in the consultancy company providing the assessment, who is supporting our assessor in some of the cases, and that's really strange. I have seen the assessors doing everything alone, and that's wrong. And also we have another major component, knowledge base, because I don't expect to have an assessor who knows everything. Now let me focus on some of the major failure in assessment with this listed point here on the right. So first one is poor selecting process. And what I mean by that, poor selecting process for the assessor who is conducting the assessment. Now you can imagine the importance of the assessor role in this assessment. Assessors are the link and point of contact, is the one who is asking the question, is the one who is telling the risk level, who is identifying the gap, and what he is doing will be delivered at the end to the top management, and based on that maturity number, based on that mitigation plan, based on that capex and opex, etc., this company or organization will make a decision. So we can imagine how critical this job is. And when I take this point, poor selection process for assessor, it's really bad, because from what I have seen, and I have visited so many sites to do assessment so far, most of the end users I have assessed, they only asked me to provide my CV, so they know what is my background, and only 2 or 3 of these sites they conducted a technical and a security interview with me to figure out my knowledge and am I capable to do the assessment or not. And this could happen also here from the consultancy company which is providing the services. So they hire the wrong guy, or they hire a person with the wrong background, and they end up with failure result. And again, that take me to the second point here, OT expert or subject matter expert. Now let's agree that we will never have, okay, I might say that, okay, I am an OT ICS expert because I have long time of experience in the field, but it doesn't mean I know everything. Industrial control system with a lot of variety, with wireless system, with different brand of DCS, etc. It's huge. So you will never find an expert who knows everything. You will never find an expert who knows all these standard and regulation we have today, IEC 62443, NERCSIP, and all this stuff. So you always need to check the knowledge base of the assessor, and he also need to get support from some expertise within the consultancy company to support him during the assessment process, especially for the part he doesn't know. Like, for example, if he is assessing a facility that running X brand DCS in let's assume we are doing the assessment in a refinery, and he never dealt with that kind of DCS, then he will need support from someone with a proper experience to help him during the assessment. Poor or knowledge based about organization and standard assessors who just go by and have a list of stakeholders, and he start directly with doing the assessment. This I would consider it also a failure, because you need to understand the organization you are dealing with. You need to have a view of the organization chart, whom you are assessing, who will give you the right information, what do I need to do with the operating department, what do I need to do with the maintenance and engineering department. Are the maintenance departments are separated from the process department? Are they one single department? So assessors need to understand all of these things and need to spend enough time to understand it. And another reason that cause a lot of failure here is lack of support and knowledge from both ends. So you are assessing the end user's facility and they don't have that much knowledge about it, and you cannot reach the supplier at the same time. And also from the consultancy company, they have no one with the experience to support the assessor. So usually you as an end user, you need to pick up the right assessors to make sure a mistake like that will never happen. And that takes me to the lack of documents review and deliverable capability. Now, I always say for assessor to succeed, he must be a good reader, because if you work in assessment, you will really read a lot. And you cannot judge what you read if you don't understand it. You need to understand. And that includes the policy, the OT policy, for example. That includes the document, the procedure, the backup and restore procedure. Does it exist or not? How it was illustrated? Does it match, for example, with the software version available in this plant or not? So these 5 points here play a major role in whether the assessment will succeed or it will be failed. Now, talking about stakeholders, in my opinion, stakeholders play a major role in succeeding any cybersecurity assessment scope of work. And I bulleted it here to 3 different scenarios. The first one is when the managerial level are involved in the assessment as stakeholders, where we focus on the operation department manager, for example, the maintenance department manager, the section head, maybe, and process manager. And we forget about those who are working in the field, like the operator, like the maintenance engineer, like the safety engineer, etc. Taking information from managerial level is not recommended, and in most of the cases it will lead to a failure, not because the managerial level is not good, but because the knowledge they have is not enough. And I wouldn't, for example, get an information or detailed information from the managerial level on how the operation are running. I need to ask the operator, I need to sit with the operator, do the interview, understanding the accessibility level to the system, how they are doing, what are the case if I have a delay. So if I decide to set a complex password to your HMI, what are the delay result? And that's really important to identify your correct stakeholders, not those who are in managerial level. And this takes me to scenario 2, where assessors need to have a very good understanding of the organization chart. And one of the major failure here is the lack of knowing and understanding the different OT related rules and responsibility within the operation department, within the maintenance department, the process department. And it's different from one end user to another based on the process they are running. And also, one of the major failure is the assessors is not familiar with the supply chain process within that end user, and the lack of knowing and understanding the OT supply chain process here and the involved vendor, supplier, and service provider is a major cause of failure. Always the assessor need to identify whom do I need to succeed in my assessment, because you cannot get all the information you need from the operation department or from the maintenance department. Still, there is a level of information hidden from that level, and you need to get it from the vendors, from the one who had programmed the PLC, the RTU, who configured the RTU, who managed and configure the DCS system. So these are 3 scenarios about stakeholder. I have another 3 also. Scenario goes under the lack of preparing and understanding your stakeholders, and this is important for the assessors to understand. Now, if you are doing an assessment to X company and you don't build a good awareness session to tell them what's going on and why you are doing it, people will take step back. When you do the assessment, you will find some resistance. So in the first scenario, the stakeholder, they don't know really what's really going on and what they need to provide to support the assessment. Now, in some cases, you might have already told during maybe the kickoff meeting with the top management that you are doing X, Y, and Z, but no one delivered this message to the stakeholders who will attend the assessment with you, the interview with you. And here I would recommend you always have a short session, a 5-minute session to explain your stakeholder what you are doing. Now, if you are coming from OT ICS background and you start your discussion with that by telling your stakeholders, that will start helping in building a bridge with your stakeholder. But if you go to your stakeholder and they are not aware what's going on, then you are building a gulf with them and you will not succeed in communicating with them. Scenario number 2, assessors may not be aware of the stakeholder engagement level, the one on the right. And I'm taking this one from PMB, by the way. And he is not also aware about their responsibility, and he is not predicting how they would respond and support and how he or she should act. So usually when you deal with stakeholder, You have different type where we have the very supportive stakeholder, the leading stakeholder who will help you and who will even guide you to reach to person X, to person Y to support you. In scenario number 3, distinguish false information from the true information. This is really important skill the assessor need to get, because assuring correct information are gathered from the right stakeholders, it's really a big challenge. It's really a big challenge. For point number 3, the coverage and complexity, and that play a major role in any cybersecurity assessment. Now, with coverage and complexity, assessors need to decide what system, what process are under cover, and what are the complexity of this process. Now, if I give you the diagram on the left, and you are coming from OT, ICS background, you will be able to put some assumption and say, okay, system A could be some sort of isolated system from any other process, and system B could be a filling machine. System C could be a packing machine, and both of them are connected and working together. And both of them are connected to system E, which is a human machine interface. This could be easy for someone understanding the process. But when you give this to someone who doesn't have the background of OT, he will not be able to figure out what's going on in this diagram. For example, if I take system Z or system Z, he might say that, okay, this is an attacker. But for someone coming from OT ICS background, he would say that, okay, it's someone with remote access. It could be the vendor. What I'm trying to say here with this diagram is identifying criticality based on functionality understanding is important for the assessor. And also the assessor need to understand who is talking to who and at what level they exist and talk, and why they are talking and what they are talking about and how they talk and how they are interconnected. How many database in this system? As we know, in some servers we have an industrial control system, we have more than one database. Who is accessing what and from where and for what, and who is collecting what and from where and for what? If the assessor cannot ask these questions and understand it, and he doesn't have anyone to support him on this with proper knowledge, because I don't expect someone to know all of this, the assessment will fail again. In my final slide for today, the acceptance and realistic action, rejecting the assessment result due to several reasons by the end users. One of them could be the lack of awareness, so the organization are not aware about the importance of this task, or they only did it just to become compliance or meet X target. One of the reasons, the conflict of interest, where we could have a conflict between, for example, two different departments under OT and no one want to take the responsibility. Budgetary related reasons due to overcost or whatever. Manpower and expertise, because we don't have the right people who could drive or take the initiative to take this assessment result into action and start working on gap mitigation, etc. Now, realistic action is not taken to move forward with mitigation plan and security enhancement. One of the major reasons here, roadmap and mitigation plan actually don't reflect existing OT and ICS environment. And gosh, I have seen that a lot. Budget and overcost, because maybe the OT budget is part of the IT budget and we don't have enough money. And we know when it comes to gap mitigation in OT, it's not something cheap we are dealing with. Lack of expertise within organization, again, and wrong CapEx and OpEx calculation, maybe because we took it from another reference or we don't have the right people to deliver that. vendor support an old or obsolete system. Usually when you want to mitigate the gap, you will need support from the vendors who provided you the system. And you can imagine when you have a system that is obsolete and not supported anymore, then you have to go with upgrade, and that can be reflected on the budget and over cost. Or an old system that is not that the supplier of the system is not reachable anymore. So these are some of the reasons that could affect the acceptance and prevent taking a realistic action. Thank you very much for your attention and interest. I really appreciate it, and now we can go with the questions.